You know, namesake, I've been thinking, what do you do when you reach rock bottom? I know a lot of us know what rock bottom is, but I think a definition will help get us moving forward. Rock bottom is a place that everyone gets to at least a few times in their life, where they have no recourse or they don't seem to have any options available to them. They are as low can be. The symptoms may include waking up at 2 p.m. with scratches and bruises that you don't know where you got them. It's often marked by a perpetually negative balanced bank account or the increasingly high piles of laundry and beer cans that go all over your apartment when you're in that kind of state. And there's usually some kind of substance abuse, be it, alcohol or coffee. Usually grad students feel like they're at rock bottom every semester. Although, I do acknowledge that it can get a whole lot worse. And you asked me in your last video if there are examples in literature of people who reached rock bottom, and if the literary figures of the past, our sages of yore, had any advice for people who found themselves so situated. And oh my gosh, yes they do. This is the one question that most literary figures have tried to answer. I'm thinking of Whitman, I'm thinking of Dostoevsky, I'm thinking of Shakespeare. I wanted to do this video about Lear, or, characters like Job from the Old Testament, or even Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad. But gosh, that's gonna be a long video if I name everybody. So I figured I'd go with the figure who is most representative of rock bottom, and that is, of course, Satan from Paradise Lost, the poem by John Milton, who I believe to be the greatest poet in the English language. Now, when I say Satan, I mean the character of Satan, not the entity of evil identified as the devil by the Christian, Jewish, Islamic traditions. I'm talking about a very specific character, a dramatic character, who gets up on the stage, as it were, of the poem and says such memorable lines as, "'Tis better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." That particular line shows up in the poem at the moment that Satan picks himself up, as it were, off of the molten lake of fire. Now, the poem begins in medias res, that means in the middle of things. And you find Satan and the horde of fallen angels in a place of torment. Not necessarily hell. Heaven and hell, Milton says, not necessarily being created yet, but it's pretty bad. It's kind of like hell. And the reason he is on this lake of fire, he is being punished. He had been thrown down into it because he and the rest of the fallen angels had rebelled against God and wanted to take his power for themselves. So there was war in heaven, and they lost that war. They lost that war magnificently. They got beat stupid bad. But you're gonna have to do much more than a sea of fire to deprive Satan of his will to win. In the distance, he sees a second in command, Beelzebub, struggling to keep his head over the tide, and so he swims over to him, and he begins to regale him and encourage him, saying, "What though the field be lost? All is not lost." And I'm reading from Paradise Lost, Book 1, verse 105. "The unconquerable will," he says, "and study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. If we have these things, what else is not to be overcome?" And the demons, or I guess they're fallen angels at this point, they hear him and they take heart. And so they swim out of the fiery lake and up onto the shore, where they make for themselves a shelter. Now, this is no shack or lean-to. This is pandemonium, the house of the demons, with walls and parapets. It's just a regular stronghold with storerooms and halls and a throne room where they go to hold a council of war. And in this council of war, Milton has 4 fallen angels give 4 speeches. And in these speeches, he lays out the options that are available to people who find themselves at rock bottom. The first of the fallen to give his counsel is Molech. And Molech is something of a meathead. He's just angry that he lost, and he doesn't want to live anymore because, shoot, I'll have to carry the shame with me now for the rest of eternity. He says, let's just fly back up to heaven and throw ourselves on the walls and the swords of the archangels, not because he has any illusion that they have what it takes to retake heaven, but just because he wants to spite God. He says we should do so, and the line is, to alarm his throne. Though this be not victory, it is yet revenge. And we all know this guy. He's the sort of person that goes through life with both, middle fingers in the air, saying, well, F this, F that, or F you, and I don't give an F. And by F he means figs. He has no figs to give. I like to call this sort of thing Captain Ahab syndrome. For those of you who haven't read Moby Dick or seen the Gregory Peck movie, you should totally see it. Just rent it on Amazon. It's awesome. Moby Dick is about a whaling vessel called the Pequod, whose captain, Ahab, is seeking after the whale who bit off his leg. And when he eventually finds the whale, Moby Dick just trashes the ship, and the boat's sent after him. And by dint of circumstance, Captain Ahab finds himself tethered to the side of the whale as he jumps in and out of the water, stabbing at it with his harpoon. And he says, "From hell's dark heart I stab at thee. With hate spite I spit my last breath at thee." There's something like that. I think that's the quote. The next up is Belial. And he's a good-looking guy. Milton says of him, "A fairer person lost not heaven." And I like to think of him as the typical angelic figure who we see depicted in the paintings of the Renaissance masters. Or if you want to update it, he's the sort of guy who got a little too much into My Chemical Romance in high school, because his advice is the exact opposite of Mullig's. He says we should choose caution. We should just lie down and take it on the chin and do what we can to not lose what little autonomy we have here. He says that we should, the almighty victor, allow to spend all his rage. And this must end us. That must be our cure, to be no more, sad cure. For who would lose, though full of pain, this intellectual being? Those thoughts that wander through eternity, to perish rather swallowed up and lost in the womb of uncreated night. Now, the next person to speak, Mammon, sees through Belial's speech and is like, "Hey man, you're just being lazy. This is what we should do." Found the quote. Mammon says, "We should make great things of small, useful of hurtful, prosperous of adverse. We can create, and in what place soe'er, there thrive under evil, and work ease out of pain, through labor and endurance." And he goes on to say, and I quote, "Our torment may also, in length of time, become our elements. These piercing fires, as soft as now severe, our temper changed into their temper." Mammon's the kind of guy who, if he were abandoned on a desert isle, would just straight up Swiss Family Robinson the heck out of it, make a tree house, be a much better accommodation than either you or I could afford here in a first world country. It reminds me of a sort of R. Lee Emery character, the drill sergeant from those war movies, who's always like, "Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Life's not a bed of roses. Cowboy up, or pony up, or put up." All the ups. People like that aren't wrong. They're just, they're just jerks. Eventually, he sits down, and the final speaker arises. This is Beelzebub. I've mentioned Beelzebub before. You remember him. And he says, "Y'all are all wrong. You should listen to me. This is what we should do. I'm smart enough to know that if you're losing a game, you don't try harder, you change the rules." And then he goes on to remind them of a prophecy that had been going around through the halls and corridors of heaven about a new world that God was going to create with new creatures, new people. He says, well, why not go there? Beelzebub tells them that if they do this, they might find a spot nearer their ancient seats. A place he calls some middle zone where we can dwell not unvisited of heaven's light, secure where the brightening orient beam, the orient beam, the sun rising in the east, might purge off this gloom, and soft, delicious air heal the scars of these corrosive fires. And as you would imagine, this goes over really well with the fallen angels, and they cheer and vote on who they're going to send off in search of this new world. And there you have it. The 4 options that Milton believes everyone at rock bottom can pursue. They are as follows. 1, go out fighting, whatever that means to you. Find your white whale, let it kill you. 2, roll over and die. 3, adapt to your surroundings. This is my life now. 4, which is, of course, Satan's avenue of choice, personal reinvention. And, when you think of it that way, it makes sense that in the Western tradition, at least the Western storytelling tradition, Satan is a character who often appears at the crossroads and offers travelers an opportunity to be more than or other than they are. I'm thinking of the songs like the Crossroad Blues, where he offers a musician fame and fortune and everything that goes along with it, just so long as he signs along the dotted line. Or Dr. Faustus from Marlowe's play, and the devil by way of Mephistopheles, promises him wealth and fame and power and women and anything he could want so that he could be what he wanted to be. He turns to Eve in much the same way and says, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll not be who you are right now. You'll change. You'll be as gods. But as we know, each of those characters didn't get the fulfillment of that promise. They just ended up back at rock bottom again, some to varying degrees of severity. And the same exact thing happens to Satan. After Beelzebub's speech, he goes off in search of that new world, and he finds it. It's here. It's Earth and the Garden of Eden, where he, sneaking around, espies Adam and Eve enjoying the blisses of paradise and the joys of God's presence. And just seeing that makes him incredibly angry. And he does everything inside of his power to destroy them. And the fact that he can no longer enjoy beauty, and that the bitterness of his heart has changed him and made him a villain, so to speak, actually does bother him. He shows some remorse. In book 4, he looks around at the beauty of creation, at the glory of the sun, and he says, oh, it's a bummer, I can't enjoy these things because, and I'm quoting, never can true reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. And then a little earlier he said, which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair, which way I fly is hell, because I myself am hell. Personally, I've had a lot of friends who, due to disappointment and heartbreak, decided to pack their bags and go to a new town, go out of state. I almost did it once after an especially toxic relationship went belly up. I thought to myself, I'm just gonna go to Tucson, where my family's originally from, and I don't know, work in a bookstore or something. But I don't know if that would have helped. I would have carried the same heartache with me anywhere I went. That is exactly what happens with Satan. He goes to Eden and he ends up recreating the very same situation that got him expelled from heaven. He tempts Eve, and he tells her, if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will be as God, putting the same temptation that caused him to fall in her mind. And what do you know? She succumbs, and her falling into temptation causes her to be booted out of paradise in much the same way that he was. So when it comes to the question of which of the 4 options is the best, I'm gonna have to go with, and I hate to say it, Mammon. Mammon is a lot like Mr. Miyagi or Rocky's coach, whatever his name was. Mickey. Rocky's coach is named Mickey. He's like, yeah, kid, things may be rough right now. It may look dark, but after a few training montages, after a little eye of the tiger, eventually you will emerge out of whatever pit you found yourself in. Not because you found a way out, but because you grew too big for it to contain you. If and when you find yourself at rock bottom, adapt. take Mammon's advice. Gosh, that sounds so terrible when you say it out loud. Mammon, as a character, as he appears in Paradise Lost, take his advice, pool your resources, and as T.S. Eliot says at the end of The Wasteland, shore these fragments around your remains. And in so doing, you will, in the end, become stronger. Even if all you have left are the fragments of your own mind, since even as Satan himself says in Book 1 of Paradise Lost, the mind is its own place, and it can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. And if we take Mammon's advice seriously and do what we can to make ourselves suited to the lives in which we have found ourselves, then, I'm quoting here from Book 2, our torments also may in length of time become our elements, and piercing fires, as soft as now severe, and our temper changed into their temper. What he's saying is, our essential nature changes. And it's not actually a bad thing. Well, shoot. Look at the time. This was a long video. Thank you for sticking with me if you watched this far. It means a lot. And I would also like to open this up to the viewer and to you, namesake, especially in regard to the question of how we adapt to our environments and learn how to endure hardship. I talked a lot about the macro, that we should at least try to do so. So I'm interested in what the micro looks like, and I'm also interested in if we can avoid Nietzsche, if we're talking, philosophically about strength of the will, and so on and so forth. I would also like to know your opinion of Nietzsche, who I've always found to be a difficult philosophy. Just tell me, what you think, and maybe do a review of his work for our many viewers. Anyhow, that's all I got for us right now. As always, stay interested and keep thinking.